It was just pointless. It wasn't an emergency by any stretch of the imagination. There wasn't an imminent threat. There wasn't really anything I could do about it. I'm just down on Shore Beach in my garden. You know what I mean? I mean, the gist of it was don't light a barbecue, basically, wasn't it?
Well, there's an obvious use case for it in a country like Israel, for example, which is used to regular alerts, and there is something productive that you can do when you receive the alert.
So be careful what you wish for, football fans. You will end up probably paying a bit more money for this pointless virtue signaling.
It's ridiculous. Children need to take risks. We would prefer them to break their legs climbing trees than be addicted to Instagram.
I think children's instinct is to be basically evil.
Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every single episode by Chris Snowdon. How you doing?
Hi Tom, hi listeners. Hope everyone's well. I'm sweating still.
Even though the heat wave is kind of subsiding, you're still not used to
The
it.
time it goes out, to be fair, we don't know what it's going to be like, do we?
That's true. We're recording this a little bit ahead of time. So if
The
anything,
point is I'm sweating.
exactly.
We couldn't do it last time in the studio because it was too hot. So God knows how hot it was then.
It was
If you
quite
think
bad.
it's now acceptable.
We need to get air conditioning in there and everywhere else. Also delighted to be joined by Miriam Cates from GB News. How you doing, Miriam?
I'm not sweating.
Perfect. This is how we're going to start every podcast now, at least.
Get a sweat status update.
Exactly. Sweat status. Now that we've got the sweat status out of the way, we're going to talk about plenty today. The emergency alerts, whether or not France is actually freer than the UK, hooked off of a very good piece that Miriam wrote, as well as an update on how the gambling ban is messing up football. But Chris, should we start with those emergency alerts?
Yeah.
Which scared the life out of everyone. What was it, last Friday? The Friday before last, by the time people watch this. You wrote a piece for Spiked about it, venting your spleen. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you said in that article and why you think this new development is so ridiculous, as I think most
Just
of us
hate
would
it for so many
conclude?
reasons. And I hate the people who support it more even than the people who set the alarm off. It didn't scare me, to be fair. It was just a mild nuisance. I was sat out in the garden having a bottle of wine and I go, you know, goes off. But someone was saying they were at the Oval watching the cricket and said 15,000 of them going off at the same time. It is quite scary. You know, I got a message from a mate saying, why is the government making me nearly crash my car to tell me about kids setting fire to shit? It was just pointless. It wasn't an emergency by any stretch of the imagination. There wasn't an imminent threat. There wasn't really anything I could do about it. I'm just down on Shore Beach in my garden. You know, I mean, the gist of it was don't light a barbecue, basically, wasn't it? It was supposed to be for sort of, you know, Putin pushing the button and stuff like this. And the more I thought about how it wasn't suitable for an emergency nationwide alert going out to 87 million phones, the more I thought, like, what actually would be a suitable thing for it? And I've decided the whole thing's completely pointless because the really big stuff, like there's an asteroid on the way or there's a nuclear bomb on the way, I can't do anything about it. Probably rather not know. You know, I have 5 minutes, you know, in my garden.
You don't want to take that time to go and stand under a doorway or get under a table. Yeah.
None of it's going to make any difference. I suppose if it was like a cloud of poison gas coming over from France or something, maybe I'd prepare for it in some way. But I mean, we're looking at quite unlikely things, aren't we, already? Could you think of anything?
That's a really good question, actually. What do you think, Miriam?
Well, there's an obvious use case for it in a country like Israel, for example, which is used to regular alerts, and there is something productive that you can do when you receive the alert, which is go to find a bomb shelter that the government's already built, and you know the drill. So I do think, certainly in countries where there are regular threats and there is use for it, and I do think the government should have the facility to do it in the case of extreme emergency. But the point is, it should be to tell you to do something immediately to save your life. That is the...
Not just general advice.
Don't light a
Exactly.
fire.
Rather than telling you not to do something that you probably weren't thinking about doing anyway, and it was not going to save your life. And I think, you know, we can laugh about it and say how ridiculous, and people have got funny stories about where they were. But again, the more I think about it, the more I think that actually it was dangerous to use it, because now lots of people are going to unsubscribe, lots of people are going to take it seriously. And so that if there was ever a case where it was needed, it now won't be anywhere near as effective as it could have been. So, I mean, what on earth were they thinking? Did the power get to their head? I mean, you can kind of understand it. I was on GB News the other day, and I was telling people how to listen to GB News on the radio, and I said, just say, Alexa, play GB News. And I got a little kick out of thinking about the thousands and thousands of Alexas across the country that was suddenly switched on to GB News. And so I don't know whether the power went to their head. But I mean, I'm afraid this is the left. They love nannying. They think that they've got to tell people what to do because otherwise they're too stupid to take responsibility for themselves. And they don't think further down the line, which is the more and more responsibility the government takes for you, the less used to we less used we will become to taking responsibility for ourselves. So I think it was a terrible thing to do. We can joke about it, but it's probably made us less safe in the long run.
Yeah. Was it the fire services got together and
Basically, Burnham went to Stourbridge to look at these burnt out houses. And to be fair, the wildfires had been a real problem in Stourbridge. People could have died. They didn't, but they could have done. People have the houses burned out. It's a bad thing. It's right for the Prime Minister to go check out and offer his condolences. But clearly, while he was there, he got lobbied by the fire brigade. And he thought, oh, I've got this new toy, haven't I? I can tell everyone in the country about it. It's 7 o'clock on a Friday. People might sound, a bit hypersensitive and overreacting to a relatively minor inconvenience. I just don't like the idea that the government can just wake up mine and everybody else's phone whenever they want about seemingly anything now. We all kind of suspected there would be a slippery slope when they tested this out last September. And in a way, it's surprising it took them nearly a year to use it for something relatively frivolous. But you can see them using it all the time. Thank God they didn't have this during a pandemic.
No, but that's a good point, though, because in the pandemic, unfortunately, the messaging was unbelievably effective. And that was just using TV, the radio, social media. So he had all those options available to him. They could have bought advertising space on every single social media platform. They could have had it in the bulletins of the news all weekend. And almost everybody in the entire country would have received the message, but without having to use the emergency alert. I just don't. Even the civil servants apparently cautioned against the use for this purpose. So goodness knows what they were thinking.
You can imagine the sort of nudge unit or whether it's succeeded at saying this is terrible because it's actually going to drive down compliance or what have you.
Well, there's a number of unintended consequences. I wouldn't be surprised if someone did crash a car as a result of it.
Lots of teenagers have had their second phone exposed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and victims of domestic abuse is the one that always comes up.
People hiding phones.
Secrets. Prisoners, to be fair, prisoners shouldn't really have them. I bet it was fun in the prisons when they were in it.
Especially where they might have hidden them. But there's
vibrating.
Just stood to attention very quickly. We've talked a bit about the more serious things that they could go off, but conceivably, could they be even more frivolous things that Andy Burnham would be willing to set it off for? 5-minute alert for Oasis tickets gone sale.
Everton conceding.
The best comment I saw on Twitter was somebody who wrote something along the lines of, I don't care about the wildfires, but I'd like the missiles to be a surprise. Which I thought was quite a good comment.
That's very good. That is very good. I mean, and, use an example of Israel, Miriam. I was there recently when they were exchanging a bit of fire with Iran and the Houthis and stuff. People ignore those alerts at this point as well. Not least because certainly in the hotel I was in, the bomb shelter, such as it is, was just a little room next to the lifts on the 17th floor. You're like, this is probably not going to help if a missile collides with the building. But so as we shall look forward to what Andy Burnham unleashes on us on that front. But
I won't get it because I turned it off. Have you turned yours off?
I haven't actually, but I probably will.
Because I want to be able to moan about it as well.
Yeah.
So the woman behind the bar in the snooker club weirdly had hers already turned off, and so I went to. I was just going to show. I was showing her how to turn it off. Oh, it's already off. She goes, I didn't know that. Can you turn it back on? I need a bit of excitement in my life. But your YouGov people loved it. YouGov respondents, the worst people in the world.
Because you were saying that people who support it get on your nerves. I haven't met a single person who does support it.
People online were when I was saying it was a lot of nonsense. People were saying, it might save a single life. It's not a big restriction on liberty. That's the thing. It's like, it's only why are you getting so angry about the little thing? Well, not that angry. I was just tweeting about it, really, As I wrote an article about it, and I'm talking about it, 2 weeks later. But but that is how liberty dies. I don't want to be too cliched about it, but it's always in little increments like this. And the government it's shown that it can't be trusted with this new power it's got. And I think we have to kick off about it before they start tweeting us about, or whatever it is, texting us about every little thing.
Yeah, have a glass of water,
Yeah, it will be. They go mad for the public health stuff. Yeah, don't watch out. Don't eat ultra-processed food. Stick to your 14 units a week. Remember what the bloody chief medical officer says about this and that. You can easily see them using it.
Do not iron your clothes whilst wearing. That's the best Babel act.
Incredible. Miriam, shall we talk about the piece that you wrote for Spikes a little while ago, comparing what it's like to be in France on your holidays to what it's like to be in Britain day to day, and making a point which might be counterintuitive for some people, but I think people who, do spend a fair bit of time in France will know exactly what you're talking about, which is that even though we think of France as quite a bureaucratized, big state kind of place, the feel of it is often a lot more free, particularly when you compare it to the sort of nannying, the kind of constant messaging and health and safety that we experience day to day over here. So do you want to tell us a bit of a story as to how you came to this conclusion and what you think the key differences are?
So, I mean, ever since I was a teenager, I've had regular holidays in France, and I absolutely love France. It's a fantastic place to go on holiday, very convenient and easy to get to also. And we always joked as a family when I was a teenager that the French didn't really care much for health and safety, and certainly in public swimming pools and things like that, there were just far fewer rules and fewer people telling you off. But over recent years, especially going with my own children who are now teenagers, really, really noticed the difference in what you are just allowed to do, particularly what children are allowed to do in public, the fact that they're not told off for making noise or just being present, which is helpful. And this year, we were on Lake Biscarrosse, actually, which 5 days after we got home, burnt up in the wildfires. It was very sad seeing the places we'd been as tourists just days before in such trouble. But on Lake Biscarrosse is this aqua park, which apparently is the largest aqua park in the world. I don't know how they'd know that, but anyway, it is rather large. This giant inflatable obstacle course. And you pay to go on, and then you just spend an hour throwing each other off the water slides, huge jumps into the water. I mean, it's quite dangerous, really, but the only rule, which was quite funny, was don't push anyone you don't know. In other words, the people that you've attended with, your friends and family, do whatever you like. And my sons particularly spend the whole time literally throwing each other off 5-meter drops. And it was great. The lake was warm. It was good fun. But it just struck me that this would never, ever be allowed in Britain. And there were lifeguards there. There was a stretcher room, which probably got quite a lot of use, I imagine. But the only time I saw the lifeguard blow a whistle was when some people were jumping off a huge drop onto people below, which is obviously not a good idea. But he was blowing the whistle at the people below, telling them to blooming well get out the way quicker so that the people at the top could have fun. And there are water parks in Britain. I've been to them, and you have to go through a 10-minute safety briefing before you're allowed on. You're issued with every kind of warning in the world. They blow the whistle at you all the time. It's just no fun. But that's just a kind of microcosm of the difference between French rules and British rules. And there are so many examples I could give from over the years. And one of the ones in the piece was in the Vendée region, there's this incredible raised platform, wooden platform over the top of the trees, the forest on the Atlantic coast, where you can climb up. It must be 80 feet tall, look out over the Atlantic. It's brilliant. All that's stopping you from falling to your death is a kind of waist-height wooden rail. But it's not attended, it's not managed. You just drive up in the forest and climb it at your leisure. And again, after that holiday, I went home. We went to some National Trust property and hired a rowing boat on a river that was 80 centimetres deep. And they forced all of us to wear life jackets and made us sign a disclaimer. And it's just this... Now, France has loads of problems, like you said. They have crazy labour laws. They're very officious. You wouldn't want to start a business there. Absolutely. The bureaucracy is crazy. They have major immigration problems, political problems, housing problems, yes. But there's something about the physical freedom of being in France where you are expected to take responsibility for your own life and your children's life, and people generally leave you alone. And even down to, we ate in lots of restaurants, cafes, boulangeries over the course of the 2 weeks. Never once were we asked if we had an allergy. It was assumed that if we did, we'd take our own precautions. And we talk a lot, in these circles about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. They are really important freedoms. But I don't think we should stop thinking about our physical freedoms, which are becoming more and more depleted. And it's a bit like the emergency alert. Every time you are told that the platform might be slippery when wet, a little bit of your own agency is eroded and a little bit of your desire to take responsibility for yourself, quite frankly. And we are becoming a nannied state where everybody blames someone else if they have a physical injury rather than learning how to look after yourself, which is kind of a fundamental human skill.
And what do you think is the difference between Britain and France at the moment? Is it just a pile-up of this legislation, regulation? Is it something cultural that has changed about us
I think
noticing?
the legislation does seem to be a problem. We have very, very expansive liability laws, which means that often somebody who sues a business, for example, when actually they probably could have taken precautions themselves, the judge will award the costs because the business is seen as the big beast. And then, of course, that's like case law, isn't it, really? And then people start to take more and more precautions. So I think the law is a problem. But we saw in COVID this deep desire that British people have, a lot of them, to be told what to do. They want the government to tell them what to do. And I don't think that's the case in France. I went on a holiday in France during the pandemic when, in theory, they had all the same rules as we did. You wouldn't know the pandemic on. Few people put masks on in shops. But other than that, it was complete freedom. People just ignoring the rules and nobody cared. And the French just don't feel the same moral imperative to do exactly what they're told as we seem to want to do. And I don't know where that comes from, because I don't think that Brits in previous generations or pre-war Brits were quite so keen on being told what to do by the government. But somehow, maybe it was the war that changed our psyche with rationing and curfews and things like
All
that.
the best
I don't
people
know.
were killed.
Well, maybe,
Or
yeah,
is
all
that
the
for a
most
theory?
freedom-loving
risk
people were
takers,
killed.
isn't
The
it?
risk
The
takers.
First World War even more so.
That's true. Maybe that's true. And everybody became very fearful. But
Whereas the French just surrendered.
that's true.
So fewer deaths.
Well, maybe that's it. I wouldn't propose that to a French person, but there could be. Anyway, I just think we need to be just as careful about protecting our physical freedoms as we do about our kind of metaphysical ones, for the sake of our children, who are now not allowed to do anything outdoors, who've had all the roundabouts in the country taken away. Most of the slides, the swings are kind of tied so that they can't swing properly. This is ridiculous. Children need to take risks. We would prefer them to break their legs climbing trees than be addicted to Instagram. In the long run, that's better for them. So, let them have more freedom, let them take more risks. And we're just going the opposite way in this country, in a way that I don't think the rest of Europe really is.
Did you read the piece in The Spectator a few weeks ago about how Denmark makes children's playgrounds deliberately dangerous?
No, I didn't, but that sounds great.
It's up your alley. Well, that's about the gist of it, really. I mean, they don't make any attempt to. Well, I mean, they don't put broken glass down on before or anything. But if
River of lava.
if there's a dangerous looking tree branch or something that looks like it's going to fall down, they don't bother dealing with it. And they have various things that could clearly cause injuries, and they go, well, they're just going to have to learn. Whereas we just make everything of that weird squashy kind of.
Yeah, children's play areas look like kind of postmodern art installations now. Everything very smooth and round and multicoloured, but nothing actually ever to climb or.
And I did wonder when I on this aqua park in France, I was the only mum. Like, it was all teenagers and a few dads. And I was like, what am I doing here? But I thought, well, middle-aged French women don't have to do this to feel freedom. Do you know what I mean? They're sat on the edge of the lake with a glass of wine and a cigarette. But because I feel so restricted in Britain, as a 43-year-old woman, I'm throwing myself around this crazy aqua park. But it's just. But it is a serious point, because children learn to take risks by being unsupervised, being with each other, having to work out how to negotiate climbing a tree or sorting out an argument. The best thing we could do for our children is leave them alone, outside, together, in a physically risky space. That would grow a generation of leaders and risk takers, but we're doing the absolute opposite, and that's what worries me.
And Chris, I suppose a recurring topic on this podcast is what country you might escape to in order to get away from the nannying nature of British life and the state. Would France be out there? Is it just because the laws are still too bad as far as?
No, I'm in France for a very long time. I have a semi-irrational hatred of the French, but I do admire them, to be fair. I mean, they stick up for themselves against the British, in a lot of ways, which is why I don't really want to go there. And I'm sure Miriam's right, and I think you're right in saying that the problem basically comes from the ground up, that we're just a pathetic nation now. In the main, probably. Again, keep coming back to these YouGov surveys. I would love for it to be proven that YouGov surveys get a massively unrepresentative sample of the population, and I suspect to some extent it does, but it's still a really a bad sign every time you read one of these bloody YouGov surveys. They're always on the other side of the argument to me.
What was the percentage of people that were coming out of the pandemic and they wanted nightclubs closed permanently?
That was 25%. Nightclubs, casinos closed permanently. Rule of 6 in place forever. Quite a large number of people thought that was inappropriate.
Just in case.
And that wasn't even YouGov. I think that was Comrades. So, look, we've got a serious problem here with. We're a busybody nation. I don't think the French are. Right, I think the French are.
Well, that's
kind
what
of
we can
opposite.
sometimes flatter ourselves with this kind of. We have this tradition of freedom and so on, which is true traditionally, but it doesn't seem to be anymore.
We've also got a quiet tradition of curtain twitching.
Exactly, the
busybodies.
nosy Parkers is, or we used to talk about it.
It's also an extreme form of individualism, where we only think about the impact of certain things on the individual, rather than the creeping impact over time on society as a whole. Because you could argue about the emergency alert. If it saves one life, it's worth it.
No, it's not.
No. Well, I'm saying you could argue this, right? This is what people argue. I'm not arguing that. You could argue that. And lots of people argued exactly the same for all the COVID restrictions. And it makes you sound cruel if you say, well, actually, do you know what? If a few people die, well, we'll just have to live with it. Could say exactly the same with kind of motor regulations and things like that. But the point is, if you take it in the round, what is best for society as a whole in the long term is to basically allow people freedom and get them to take their own responsibility. That will save more lives in the long run. But it's very hard to make that argument anymore because people don't really believe in society. They just believe in individual harm, individual care. That's what they want. They want to be looked after, their own life, the lives of their family. And they're not looking at what does that mean for culture as a whole and where are we going as a society. So they want basically everybody else to be locked down so that they're safe.
That's interesting. So almost safetyism is kind of selfish.
Yeah, it's an extreme form of individualism, isn't it? Where all that matters is the self, rather than thinking that actually I share this country with lots of other people and I am invested in what it becomes like in the future and what it is like now for everybody, not just whether I personally am safe. And maybe other countries, certainly probably more Catholic traditional countries, have a little bit more of a collective idea of society than we do.
It's a good point about the Catholicism. They are more laid back on the nanny state stuff than the Protestants are. I don't know why that is exactly, but it's definitely the case. I mean, Southern Europe and France. I did the nanny state index for the IEA. And it's clear correlation. The Scandinavian countries, Britain. Ireland, of course, is not Protestant, but is a very nanny state. But I think that's his British influence, really.
It's got something to do with the weather. Maybe as it heats up here, we'll get a bit more. We'll loosen up a little bit.
It could be. Well, yeah, I haven't noticed any sign of it. We'd still be banned barbecues, haven't we?
That's true.
So,
but only because of the imminent threat to life that they pose.
Yeah. They're just banning things just like that. It goes to Stourbridge. Oh, we're going to ban disposable barbecues now. There's no evidence that disposable barbecues cause that particular wildfire. And a lot of them seem to be started deliberately.
Who was that? There was that bloke was it the day after the emergency alert went off in London?
10
fires in London Park.
Gave him the idea.
Yeah, no, that's the other thing. Yeah,
quite possibly gave him ideas.
The unintended consequences.
Because all the teenagers obviously got their phones on and they see something coming through. Oh, that's a thought. So weekends just started. Why not go out and set some fires going? So look, I don't know. I don't know where to move to still. I've heard good things about Serbia recently. In terms of
I like Serbia.
It might be over the top for you. I don't know Serbia, but they're quite big on guns. There's a lot of guns still knocking around, but they can still smoke indoors. One of the few havens for smokers in the whole of Europe, and apparently it's relatively anarchic without being like over the top kind of Somali style. So that sounds quite good. I used to enjoy going to France back in not really enjoy. I did go to France back in.
You can't even admit to even enjoying it in the past.
Well, there's one aspect of it I did enjoy, which was how you seem to be able to get away with anything there. I'm talking about school trips. So like you could buy fags, jazz mags, knives, all this kind of stuff.
I was worried where that was going next, but
and they didn't seem to care, and that's why I like continental Europe in general. When you went on holiday, you always, even as a teenager, felt much freer. Mainly because you could buy cigarettes, to be honest. But just the fact that they didn't care about people obviously underage,
and you can park wherever you want. And I mean, it's just, I would pick France probably if I had to move somewhere else.
But in Italy, I went to a water park in Italy a couple of years ago with my daughter. It's not really my thing, but I went. And in Italy, they've got a weird rule whereby you have to have a little bonnet on to go to a water park. It's to stop headlights and stuff.
Did you have this bonnet on?
I look absolutely ridiculous.
Is there a photographic
There
evidence?
is somewhere a photo. I got like an Italian flag one. So the colours of Italy and strapped around my chin.
We'll flash it up on screen.
I look ludicrous, but I'll let you see it. And France, to be fair, does have a lot of nice day rules. And in terms of driving in particular, you've got to have
the vest, the yellow vest.
You've got to have the yellow vest, but also loads of other stuff as well. Like you've got to have a cone or something.
You used to have a breathalyzer. That's not. I don't think that's a rule anymore. But does anyone ever check? That's my point. They had the same COVID rules as we did, pretty much. In fact, worse, you had to have documents, didn't you?
Yeah.
Paper documents to be allowed to leave your house. But when I went in the middle of COVID, there was one rule. We were at like a holiday site and there were no sun loungers by the pool for some reason, but everything else was normal, completely normal in the middle of lockdown. So I think they like to have these rules and then they just don't care if people break.
I watched a lot of true crime on Netflix and I've been watching quite a few recently that were set in sort of either 2020 or 2021. And you've got all the like dash cam footage and it's all like mobile phone, everything's real footage. Mostly in America, where all the best crimes happen. But I'm watching them going, hang on, this is bang in the middle of COVID. No one's wearing a mask. People are going around to each other's houses, killing each other. So no one seems to care about it. It's like, We're the only country that actually
that follow the
enforces
rules,
this stuff.
which is why we also have not had the return to employment that other countries have had, which is why also we've got masses of NEETs and why people are just taking sick days all the time because we took it seriously and our culture changed. And I just don't think anyone else did.
I
Really
agree.
internalised lockdown. But the French have got a lot more fight than us, haven't they?
Yeah.
Like, there's that
Especially
great
when they
story.
try and raise the pension age. Bloody hell.
It was a great, my favourite story a few years ago was that like French traffic cops went on strike because they were trying to take away their right to have a glass of wine at lunchtime.
No,
It was like they were like, up with this. We will not put
Children had a glass of wine with their school lunch until the 1980s. Now that is a good idea, isn't it?
sort of Thatcher and the milk sort of equivalent.
Exactly. All countries have their own problems, it's true. But I think the one thing that you notice about Britain when you go to Europe is just how restricted we are physically. We went on a day trip to Bordeaux, went on the train. The conductor came round and I was trying to explain in my French that I had the tickets for all of us, myself, my husband, our 3 children and my parents who were dispersed across the train because it was busy. So, don't worry, I don't need to see them. I said, I've bought a ticket for this particular train, but can we come back on another train? Oh yeah, just pick whatever train you like. Can you imagine a conductor in Britain being so helpful? People just.
I remember one crazy law in France, the nicotine pouches. In theory, you can do 5 years in prison.
I saw that, yeah.
They've gone mental.
Because they want you to smoke properly.
Yeah, well, I like to think that's the reason.
They're standing up for their civilization.
They've had some pretty bad health ministers in recent years. They've gone pretty crazy on it. But as you say, probably don't enforce it much.
On that note, should we move on to our next topic, Chris, or our final topic? Before
Final
we get
topic,
to our
yes.
final questions for Miriam here. The Premier League is back, but with somewhat diminished coffers, it seems like, because of the gambling rules. Do you want to fill in our audience on what's happened here?
Interesting little story, to me at least. Just it highlights a point that should be fairly obvious, but apparently isn't obvious. The Premier League, in a failed attempt to escape further regulation, they were basically trying to get out of having this ridiculous football regulator. So they said, look, we'll get our own house in order. This is several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. We'll get our own house in order. We know people don't like all the gambling adverts on the shirts. Just weirdos complain about it for some reason, right? And I think at the time, the majority of Premiership football clubs had gambling sponsors. So they said, right, from the 2026 season, we will voluntarily ban the gambling logos on the front of the shirts. And this was an attempt to appease the anti-gambling lobby, which is obviously impossible. They said, well, it's not good enough. We should have a complete ban, and it should apply to everybody in the entire football pyramid, and indeed everybody else as well. And it didn't turn out to appease the government who brought in the football regulator anyway. They've had to go into this season where a week before the season started, the Observer reported, and the Observer also has a voluntary ban on gambling advertising for virtue signaling reasons. It reported that about 8 of the clubs, so not the best ones, the kind of one that's bottom of the table, Spurs, things like that, Sunderland, they couldn't find a sponsor. Now, I think they could find a sponsor if they tried hard enough. I mean, it's still the Premiership. But they couldn't find a sponsor who was paying as much as the gambling companies. But, I mean, there's a very simple economic point here, which is that the existing sponsors, many of whom are gambling companies, were the existing sponsors because they were prepared to pay more than anybody else to be the sponsor. And if you kick them out, then you're going to have to go down to the second tier people who are not going to be paying as much. And so it's not a free lunch here. You can't just stop an entire industry from advertising or sponsoring without the people being sponsored losing money. And the anti-gambling lobby have been kind of making the opposite case for ages, going, oh, it's a Premiership. People are queuing up to sponsor them. And of course, everyone would love to sponsor a Premiership football team, but just not at the same amount of money as Betfred and Bet365, whatever we're doing. So they've ended up highlighting what is quite an important point here, which is that if you ban gambling sponsorship, or indeed alcohol sponsorship, or junk food sponsorship, or whatever it is, there will be less money in the game. And it would be much worse actually lower down the football pyramid, because they're just less sexy clubs to sponsor. And if you did it throughout the football pyramid, you would have some clubs that genuinely wouldn't be able to find a sponsor of any type. And this is worth bearing in mind, since we, in the nanny state that Miriam rightly says we live in, there are people demanding that everything be banned from being advertised, whether it's alcohol, crypto, gambling, food, fossil fuels, you name it. So it's a bad thing for the sport. And ultimately, I mean, according to this article in the Observer, they're looking at an £80 million shortfall. This is not, it's not peanuts. even if all these clubs like Sunderland get a new sponsor, which I'm sure they will, £80 million less in the Premiership. Of course, most people like me will go, "Well, sod them, it's the Premiership, a bunch of prima donnas anyway." But they'll have to get that money from somewhere. Either they'll have to buy worse players, or they'll have to put the ticket prices up a bit. So be careful what you wish for, football fans. You will end up probably paying a bit more money for this pointless virtue signaling.
We can go back to having shirts sponsored by like Autoglass and JVC and all that.
Spiked.
Yeah, Spikes. Yeah, we
Spiked,
could
you see that?
scrabble some money together. You got any particularly strong feelings about gambling advertising or the Premier League?
I mean, I struggle to feel sorry for the Premier League, to be honest. I mean, they have ridiculous amounts of money. I think the problem with this is that if, as a country, you allow something, then what justification have you got for banning advertising? Now, personally, I think gambling is a massive problem. I think there's strong evidence that particularly for young people, problem gambling is growing. It's becoming very addictive. It's ruining a lot of lives. And I do think we actually need to look at regulating gambling itself. However, if you're going to allow gambling, if you're going to allow alcohol, if you're going to allow junk food, how can you ban advertising? That seems to me a bit of a paradox.
Well, they're going to ban it all. That's the point. You're making the point that the antis would make.
No, I said, well, you could ban, if you want to ban gambling, that's fine. You obviously then can't ban gambling. You don't need to ban gambling advertising. What I'm saying
Oh, I
is,
see. Ban
what
the
I'm
activity.
saying is,
All right.
what I'm saying is, if you allow if a particular activity or product is legal, what moral justification is there for banning the advertising of it? If you feel strongly enough that a particular thing is really socially detrimental to the country, like you could argue extreme pornography, let's say, make that argument, well then ban it, and then of course you can't advertise it because it's illegal. But you can't sit on the fence and say, well, we'll allow this, but you can't advertise it. That doesn't seem to me make sense to me.
Would you bring back cigarette advertising?
I think if you're not, well, I don't see why we should ban it if we allow the sale of cigarettes. That seems wrong. However, I do think that this is an analog argument in a digital age. The adverts that our children are fed all the time are not on football shirts. They are through YouTube and Instagram and influencers and things like that. Does what a footballer's wearing on his shirt influence where people spend their money? I don't know. I'm not sure it does anymore. I know it's name exposure, of course, isn't it? But I think we have a problem with gambling in this country. I think, look at the CSJ statistics. Probably 2.5 million lives are really quite adversely affected by it. And it's easy to say, as middle-class people who can afford a bit of a flutter, what's the problem? But I think there are people at the bottom of the social pile who are desperately affected by the addiction and the exploitation that some of these companies employ. And I certainly think it should be as an industry, much more heavily regulated. But if something is allowed in law to be sold, what's the justification for banning the advertising?
What regulation would you like to see?
Well, one of the proposals the CSJ has made is to reduce the amount that you're allowed to gamble in fixed term, in what do they call them? The fixed point.
Fixed odds betting
Fixed
terminals.
odds betting terminal.
They haven't been around for years. They
Well,
were basically banned.
They're banned,
Yeah.
yes, but they're
Well,
still
effectively banned.
But if
They
you
lowered the stake to the point. There's no fixed odds betting terminals in Britain anymore.
but online, lots of kids now.
The online slots.
The online slots. Online, the kid. I mean, I know. I've got teenagers. Particularly young boys are being drawn into gambling huge sums of money and getting addicted. I had a constituent actually when I was an MP whose life had been completely ruined by online gambling and nobody knew who was doing it, and he was completely vulnerable to it. It's taken his mum's credit card, etc. And is gambling, not talking about having a flutter on the horses, but is this kind of online gambling industry actually beneficial to society, or is it severely detrimental and harming a lot of people? And is it a form of exploitation? I don't know. I don't know enough about it to come down on one side of the fence. But I don't think gambling is a good thing at all. But on the other hand, if we allow it, then we should allow it to be advertised. Otherwise, it's just kind of being, it's being coward, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
You're not willing to make a decision.
That's a good liberal position to take. I hate it, but I don't think it should be banned, and I don't think the advertising should be banned. Fair enough. I don't agree with you about how bad gambling is overall. In fact, I quite like it, but I appreciate that you. Are you open even to bring back cigarette advertising? I would love that so much. I've got an old cigarette advert framed in my toilet, and every time I look at it, I think, oh God, I wish you could bring it back. So much beauty.
Getting rid of plain
removed from the world.
packs again, just because of the
Yeah,
uglification of public life that has gone hand in hand with that. Those
They're
olive
doing
green,
plain packaging
awful.
for vapes now, and they're going to ban vaping advertising and
But
sponsorship.
The law that really reduced smoking was the indoor smoking ban, wasn't it? If you just can't do it, that's what really
In the
cuts
long
it
term,
down.
it probably had
And
an
the
effect.
cost. And the cost.
The
of
cost, I
smoking.
think, is the only thing that's really ever worked. But that's backfiring now because there's so much black market.
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Yeah.
So before we let you get out of here, Miriam, there's 2 questions that we ask every guest on this show. The first one being, do you have a theory?
I've got a theory.
My theory is, and this comes from my background as a biologist, is that human beings are born too early. So obviously, because our heads are so big, our brains are so big, we have to be born at a far lower level of development than any other mammal. If you think, if you've had a kitten, kittens can walk within days. They become proper cats within, 3 or 4 months, able to do everything a cat can do. And we've got 2 cats that we got as kittens from the rescue shelter. They've been taken off their mother very, very soon, but they knew how to be cats. You don't have to be taught to be a cat. It's just all instinctive. All their behavior is coded for in their genes. Because obviously we are born way, way, way earlier than any other species. Human beings need constant care for at least 3 years, and then an awful lot of guidance and help for another 10. And so, of course, we are a blank slate, and who we are and our behavior and our culture and our character even is formed by how we're brought up in those first few years, rather than being imprinted on us like animals. And so there's great potential to become great people, but also a lot can go wrong. And if you look at, the small boats crisis we're seeing at the moment, and the fact that people are coming over from cultures where they genuinely think it's okay to rape women and genuinely don't believe in consent, these things are imprinted on us as culture at an early age, because we are just total blank slates as children, unlike other animals. I think all of human culture can basically be explained by that we are born as blank slates, and what comes next.
It should be more instinct, you think?
Well, no, I think that the beauty of humanity is that we can rise above our nature. We are not just programmed biologically. We have free will, we have choice, we can create incredible cultures where we actually do resist our biological desire to kill someone or eat the first thing we see, because we're able to control our behavior in a way that animals aren't. So it's both the blessing, I suppose, of humanity, but it's also the curse, because, if you are brought up in a evil culture, or a culture that, is destructive or tribal or ever like that, then obviously you're going to have bad outcomes. But I think it explains pretty much everything about the arguments we have, is that we are not formed when we are born in the same way that animals are. If we were born at the same developmental stage as most mammals, cats, dogs, you'd have a 3-year pregnancy. That's kind of the level of development that a 3-year-old child has, is what a lamb has or a calf when they're born. But instead we need, and so, that's why things like attachment to the parent or the mother in the first year, and how many words you hear before you're 2 and things like that, are so utterly important, because you're literally still, you should be in the womb at that point by any other metric, but we're not, which is, gives you great potential to influence the next generation, but also great potential to cause huge damage. And that's the story of human culture, isn't it? How do you create a society where children are routinely taught how to be good, productive people rather than destructive people?
I think children's instinct is to be basically evil.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to be selfish and
We're the worst of humanity in this tiny, adorable bundle.
Slight digression on this, but it just brought it to mind. The most mental nature program I ever saw was about the cuckoo. You ever seen how the cuckoo goes about, like, taking over a nest? It's insane. There's like some spotted warbler or something. It takes the nest. It puts the eggs in the nest, and instinctively the baby cuckoo sounds like loads of baby warblers, right? That in itself is pretty cool. But what's really amazing is the moment the cuckoo is born, it would generally be one cuckoo egg, I think, in a nest of the warbler eggs. The moment it is born, and it tends to be born before the other ones, but not always, the first thing it does within minutes of being born is chuck all the other eggs over the side of the nest. And if there's a baby warbler in there, chuck it over as well. And that kind of thing blows my mind, of instinct being so just there from the first moments,
That gene, or the group of genes, has survived because it makes the baby cuckoo more likely to survive. And
It still seems like magic.
All animal behavior can be explained by, survival of the fittest, but humanity is such an exception to that, because we've got the ability to shape our own behavior in a way that animals just don't. which is great and also terrible.
Animals are terrible people.
Yeah, they are. So selfish. They just kill things.
Exactly. And very funny, Miriam, if you had to have one ban, what would it be?
You are a dictator.
Well, you've told me I'm not allowed to ban anything worthy. I did think about, playing music on trains, but I'm sure everybody said that because
Yes,
it's so
pretty much every other
arsely.
episode, yeah.
So I'm going to go for something really, really nerdy, and it's the misuse of less and fewer. That winds me up intensely, and I have to sometimes bite my tongue to stop myself correcting guests on air on GB News because it's just so bad.
I get a bit annoyed, so I've gone one level above that now. I get annoyed by people misusing decimate.
Oh, if they don't mean
If
to
they
reduce
don't
it by
mean reducing
10%.
by exactly
Yeah.
10%, then it's like, no. You mean annihilate or something like that. You do not mean decimate. Admittedly, there are very few contexts in which you actually can use the word decimate appropriately. I don't care. I'm
Once you see it,
uber
it
pedant.
really annoys you.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
exactly. Yeah, and also people misusing shooting himself in the foot, which people generally these days make out like it's an accident. But the whole point of shooting yourself in the foot is deliberate act.
To
Right? Be
absolve
sent back
yourself
from the
or
front.
something,
sort of
yeah.
thing,
Yeah,
or
it was
whatever.
like, but you better right cock up there, shot yourself in the foot. So no, that was an accident. Shooting yourself in the foot was deliberate. I could go on at length about these things, but yeah, I just go around finding more and more things to aggravate me.
That's basically what this podcast is. It's turned into.
pretty much.
Well, on that note, move to France, use the word decimate properly, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or band suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.